But as you know, Theology on Tap is our once a month get together, sometimes online, and now for this first time in Tower Grove Park. And depending on weather, we may be able to do this in November. We'll have to see if Tower Grove will let us turn these lights on if we're going to gather in November. But we get together once a month and we talk about faith and we talk about politics and we talk about life and we try to have conversations that people don't get to have that often. And so when we were thinking about the October Theology on Tap and we were thinking about doing it in Tower Grove Park, I thought, well, it might be an interesting thing to talk about what you can see right over there. Right where that car is turning around, there is now an empty plinth. And back in, I can't remember if it was April or May, that plinth held one of the oldest statues of Columbus in North America. Shaw himself, the donor of Tower Grove Park, the Episcopalian who held people in chattel slavery and made big donations to the Episcopal Diocese and the cathedral, and who gave the city this park, and wanted that statue. And there's a whole story about Shaw and how he wanted the statue. It wasn't a typical Columbus statue, it had a big beard. It's really interesting stuff. But in the midst of the moment that happened after George Floyd, there was a revisit to removing the Columbus statue. And that, I don't know if there's been any other action in St. Louis yet. There's some stuff that's being talked about in the county and in University City, but that was the visible sign of the movement that opened back up this summer after the death of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, that we removed a Columbus statue. And I thought it would be really interesting to get together with Ben Sanders and check in on Christian ethics, Black Lives Matter, and statue removal. Statues are something that people of faith have something to say about, at least biblically. So many of you have met Ben before. Ben has become a friend. He is a theologian at Eden Seminary specializing in ethics. We last had Ben with us when we were relaunching Theology on Tap in person again back in February to talk about was it January? It was the beginning of the year to talk about Dr. King. Yeah, it was winter, and back in the before time. So, and Ben helped us relaunch Theology on Tap then. And now we're going to relaunch again outdoors, and we'll see if we can make that last for a little while. But help me welcome Ben Sanders.
Hello everyone, can y'all hear me okay if I speak like this? Okay, cool. So I want to first just thank Mike for inviting me to Theology on Tap. I think this is a good idea. I always think it's a good idea to drink beer at the park. I think it's an especially good idea to drink beer at the park and talk about faith. And I just think that in these times, especially as we inch towards the end of weather that will be comfortable for being outside for long periods of time, it's really nice to come outside and be with y'all. So I'm really happy to be here. So I live not far from here. I live in the neighborhood. My wife and I live in the neighborhood. And so I used to run by that statue all the time. So, you know, my friends and I've got a couple of friends who also live relative in this part of town. They don't live in Tower Grove, but they live close to us. And both of us black males, well, so sometimes there would be three of us. One time there were four of us, but there would always be groups of black men. And we would meet right around here for our run. We'd had a path that we'd run through this park, and then we'd come out. But there was always something about that statue. There was always something about that statue that when we ran, we would. So I don't know how y'all are aware of your bodies when you're outside and in public, but we were always very aware that we were black men running in this park in the morning. And all the parts of that statement are important for tying our being in this park to that statue. We always thought we thought that sometimes we got looks from folks that we would run past that reflected that it was really rare to see a group of black men in the park running together. So we were intentional about that. One of the things that me and this group of friends shares a commitment around is trying to help people see black people in a way that they don't usually. So I'm a theology professor with locks who drinks beer in the park and talks about statues, right? And that excites me not just because I like kind of weird, quirky stuff, but also because I like to invite people into disturbing whatever conceptions they have of kind of how black people move. But we would always run through this park, and we would meet right around this statue, and we never talked about the statue. We never made any explicit mention of the statue, despite the fact that we met right here. We would finish our runs. This is the end of our path, right? So we've got something like a 2 and a chunk mile path that we run through here. So we start here, right next to the statue, and we run through the park, and we come back around this way, right? And so in many ways, Columbus marked the beginning and the end of our journey together. But we never talked about Columbus. He was just there, watching over us, listening to the ways that we thought about our bodies, listening to the ways that we were aware of our bodies, never having to be acknowledged because it's Cristopher Columbus, and there's a statue of him. One of the things that I think the removal of this statue gives us a really deep opportunity to think about, it's not just the way that objects reflect our values. That's important. And I think one of the kind of questions Mike has prepared that'll kind of help us think out loud about statues will sort of help us touch on that. But that's almost too easy, right? It's not the statue and what the statue reflects about our values. And in this way, I'll just sort of share early on that my take on the removal of statues, Confederate and otherwise, is that the removal is great. But I really, really wish that we had a plan, a national plan, for museums that were going to house these statues and the histories of their construction, the folks who built them, why they built them, why these statues were deemed important or valuable symbols. Because what I'm afraid is happening, in some ways, is that as the statues disappear, so do our remembrances of what used to be there and how long it stood there. And the fact that it stood there without anyone, including me and my friends who would run here all the time in the park, having to acknowledge it. Columbus is sort of an imminent but transcendent figure for us in that way. Right there, smack dab in front of us. But the presence is so presupposed that we don't even acknowledge it. The removal of this statue is a good thing, contextually, in my opinion, because it represents a victory for folks who don't want to have to look at symbols that demean and devalue. But what happens to the actual sort of concrete, meaningful content that statue used to point us toward? Does the absence do the moral, the ethical, the spiritual work that the presence could do? And more importantly, because we live in a society that very quickly forgets about just in fact how racist we are, right? We've got this idea about progress that's just deeply ingrained in who we are. What happens in 25, 30 years when there are more and more people who live in this neighborhood who don't even know, because they moved here from out of town, because they move in circles who never talk about it, they don't even know that there used to be a statue of Cristopher Columbus right there. So some of what I want us to sort of be able to talk about together today, as we chat about the questions a little bit, is I want to talk about statues, but I also want to invite us to be thinking about how we see what we see. How we see what we see, the shape of our perception, the sort of social construction of how we see the world, and how the shape of our perception, the social construction of our perception, is directly connected to what we see and don't see in statues. So all of this is a little amorphous right now, but we'll ground it a little bit here with some questions, I think. So I don't have much more to say. No, because I want to save that point for the golden calf conversation. So.
So I do have some questions for you, and what I would propose is we kind of orient ourselves because we've got enough chairs that folks can spread out, and maybe we'll have 2 pods of 3. But these are the questions, and I'll bring them over to you. Statues and monuments tell a particular story of who we are/were as a community, as a nation. How has your perception of our history or our identity as a country shifted in recent years? My dad is fond of saying lately, I didn't grow up in the country I thought I grew up in. Mm-hmm. Critics have asked whether removing the statue of Cristopher Columbus and the movement for Black lives are related. How are they related to you? Whose statue would you like to see set up in Tower Grove Park? And then finally, statues have a particular biblical resonance, and it's not a good one. This Sunday, Holy Communion and many other churches will read the story of the golden calf. If we take our focus off statues, what are the changes for which you hope this moment in our history is remembered? So, are there other changes besides removing statues you're hoping we remember by? And we'll take about 15 minutes and space yourselves, and then we'll come back as a big group. And I might invite you to scoot a little closer, just a little closer.
So Mike, there actually was, you reminded me.
Yeah, okay, so Ben does have one more thing he wants to say.
So this is just very quick, and so I couldn't remember if this was when I sort of plotted in my head that I wanted to share this thought out loud. But I think it was before we went into these groups, and it has to do with the story of the golden calf, right? And one of the things, that's such a good question, so lectionary oriented folks are going to be reading this across the country this weekend. So just remember what happens in that story. The people get tired of waiting for Moses, and they have this gold that they got from Egypt. That's where the gold comes from. They got this gold on their way out of Egypt, and they get tired of waiting for Moses. They don't know what has happened to him. Moses, right, the symbol of God's faithfulness to Israel, the right sort of leading symbol. And they get tired of waiting for Moses. They say, we do not know what has happened to him. Right? They don't have confirmation that he's dead or that anything bad has happened. We do not know what has happened for him to him. But here's this gold, and make gods for us. Right? And so there's this idea sometimes that the construction of the statue is the problem. But then there are other places in the Bible where altars and tabernacles and arks are built, and there are very specific instructions for how things ought to be done. And so one of the things that I just want to offer to you as you think about, especially that ark question, is, the problem is not in the constructing, it's in how we think about the purpose and nature of what we're building, right? So just in terms of thinking about that the story of the golden calf, right, in the Bible, and the Israelites' impatient rush to this idol in the place of Moses and God. The problem is not that we build things; it's what we understand ourselves to be building, right? So I offer that just as something to chew with. Okay. Oh yeah.
All right, friends. So I'm going to start with the second part of the second question. Whose image do you want? Whose graven image do you want to erect in Tower Grove Park?
Ida B. Wells.
Ida B. Wells.
Ah.
I like that. Anybody else?
Nobody. We don't know what.
Why does it have to be a person?
Why does it? Oh, who? It doesn't have to be a person.
I like this. I like this.
For what?
Who did you say, Maggie?
I said for what? Like,
Oh, for what?
Person?
Yeah.
There's no reason.
Yeah. I at one point, so one of our vestry members is on the board of Tower Grove Park, and we were bouncing ideas back and forth. And Maya Angelou had a house not very far from here, so I was a big proponent of that. But she said she never wanted to come back to St. Louis. So,
Maya Angelou said she never wanted to come back to St. Louis.
Yeah, so
you got to direct me to that quote.
So that I could send it to you. For her, it was personal history. It's a lot of the stuff from I Know Why the Cage Bird Sing happened in St. Louis.
I see.
So that was a lot of that. But
got it.
But yeah, I was like she's a few blocks from here, but yeah. Others, any ideas?
Did you have ideas about non-human statues?
Well,
Specific ideas?
Art or yeah. I mean, I guess the thing is like so like I will say I do work for the History Museum.
Yeah.
So I kind of got, and I did help, like, the first time people wanted to tear that down. I have, like, a whole story about the people who, the reason behind wanting to tear it down was incredibly wrong. It didn't line up with, like, the history of St. Louis, because they thought that Henry Shaw had personally stolen land from Native Americans, which was crazy, but I couldn't tell them that was wrong, because that was being wrong for library ethics. But like,
I'm sorry, that would be wrong for your what?
Like, in the library world, you kind of have to, your kind of ethical code is that you help people do research and like figure out the answer for themselves. Your job is not to tell them how to interpret the data. Like, my job is to get you a book, and unless you ask for my opinion, I'm not supposed to give it to you. But like, I don't see why you couldn't just have like some sort of figural representation of like, the native people whose land this was, or like, a group of protesters who, like at the arch, like, there's arguably there should be a Percy Green statue at the arch.
Yeah.
Like there's like all kinds of groups of people or, kind of movements that have happened in St. Louis since its kind of founding in the 1700s that like could easily be memorialized in some capacity. And, the fact that people kind of assume that, like, one person needs to be replaced by another person is kind of silly because, like, who made that rule up? Like, it's not a, give me a bird for all I care. Like, Father was like, why can't it just be, like, some sort of, like, wildlife that, like, humans have made extinct?
This is good. Other thoughts? Other thoughts?
Anything else on that question around?
Oh yeah,
All right, friend. So I'm gonna start with the second part of the second question. Whose image do you want? Whose graven image do you want to erect? Ida B. Wells. I like that. Anybody else? So Holy Communion. Who? It doesn't have to be a person.
I like this.
What did you say? Kind of talked with the vestry about, like, talked with the mayor of the city about Worth, the corner of Delmar and Jackson.
Yeah. I at one point,
And,
so one of our vestry members
I
had asked
had
for the
a
Power
question
Park, and we were
back-
bouncing ideas back and forth. And Maya
2-3
Angelou
years ago,
had a house not
about
very far
Jackson,
from here, so I was a big
and where that name
proponent of
comes
but
from.
she
And
said
it
she
just
never wanted to
happened
come back to
that
St.
the
Louis.
archivist for the diocese
Maya Angelou said she never wanted to
and
come
the
back.
archivist
so you
for
gotta
University
correct me.
City.
So that I could send it to you.
And they live
For her, it
2
was
houses
personal
over.
history. It's a lot of the stuff
And
from
so
I
Sue
Know Why the
Rakoff,
Cage Bird
like,
Sing
got
happened
into it
in
for
St.
me.
Louis.
I see.
And
So that was a lot.
she
of that,
found
but-
out,
But
it's
yeah.
like a
I was-
I can't remember the guy's
I
name.
was
There's a big
St.
English
Louis
historian who
Yeah.
said, like, Jackson is because.
Did you have
his family
ideas about
was an
non-human
unreconstructed
statues?
Confederate.
Specific ideas?
And it was his land there in Clayton that he had 2 streets named. And those 2 streets were Lee and Jackson. So it's pretty obviously for Stonewall Jackson. And the new city just took Jackson that was in Clayton and just continued it. And so a lot of people in New City think it's for the president, Andrew Jackson, which is problematic in itself. But it is for Stonewall Jackson. So I guess it's now been rolled into a wider county-wide conversation about name changing and streets. And I don't know if Clayton actually changed the name of Lee Street. I know they were talking about it. But
I'm sorry, that would be wrong for your what?
that we would approve. We didn't like encourage the change because we thought that was too strong of an act of our birth. Right? We would approve of a change in the street. We wouldn't have an issue with the change in the street, and we would be happy to be invited into a conversation about what it should be named. But then we wanted to add to that. So it ended up being one of the longer vestry things we ever passed. So we added to the resolution that, but we also commit ourselves to the wider work of dismantling racism, because street names and statues is just one part of it. So it was a really fascinating vestry discussion. It's some really, and it passed unanimously, but how we wanted to make this distinction about, we probably have the most prominent corner in U City of Jackson Street.
Yeah.
So how we want to do that.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I do think is incredibly important is, it's not enough. I think we have to be intentional. I truly believe that we have to be intentional in what type of work we want our new imagery to do. So, I'm all open to different ways we can be creative about that. But I do think that, so I love this idea of why replace.
Anything else on that question?
But I'm also open to particular humans, right? I think a statue of certain black women right there at that entrance to this park would be incredibly powerful. But that has to
how
do
are
with
they
my
related?
experience
Black Lives Matter
into the
and
city.
statue. Are they related?
The way that that works, and my sense of what stories need to be told louder and louder and louder and more often.
So Holy Communion,
in order for
around the same
create
time,
different relationships with our symbol.
kind of talked with the vestry about
Right,
it. I talked to the mayor of the city about it. So we're in the corner of Delmar and Jackson.
The first question.
And I had asked the question back,
who we are as a community,
was
as a
that,
nation.
like 2-3 years ago,
How our perception of our
about
history,
Jackson
our identity,
and where that name comes from. And it just happens that the
if I could, I'd love to hear
archivist
what y'all thought
for the
about that.
Diocese
This
of
question, I choose on this
Missouri
question the
and
longest.
the archivist for University City are the same person, and they live 2 houses over from Holy Communion. And so Sue Rakoff got into it.
How
for
is your
me.
perception of our
And
history?
she found out that it's like a I
Shifted.
can't remember the guy's name, but there's a big St. Louis historian
Has
who
it shifted?
said Jackson is because
Yeah, so
Mr.
what's that shift
Hanley
been like?
was
What
an
is that?
unreconstructed Confederate,
Yeah.
and it was his land there in Clayton that he had 2 streets named, and those 2 streets were Lee and Jackson. So it's pretty obviously for Stonewall Jackson, and then U City just took Jackson that was in Clayton and just continued it. And so a lot of people in U City think it's for the president, Andrew Jackson, which is problematic in and of itself, but it is for Stonewall Jackson. So I guess it's now been rolled into a wider countywide conversation about name changing and streets, and I don't know if Clayton actually changed the name of Lee Street. I know they were talking about it. But the vestry decided to vote that we would approve. We didn't encourage the change because we thought that was too strong of an act of our birth, but we would approve of a change of the street. We wouldn't have an issue with the change of the street, and we would be happy to be invited into a conversation about what it should be named. But then we wanted to add to that, so it ended up being one of the longer vestry things we ever passed. So we added to the resolution that. But we also commit ourselves to the wider work of dismantling racism, because street names and statues is just one part of it.
Right.
So it was a really fascinating vestry discussion.
Yeah.
With some really, and it passed unanimously, but how we wanted to make this distinction about, we probably have the most prominent corner in U City of Jackson Street.
Yeah.
So how we want to do that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I do think is incredibly important is it's not enough. I think we have to be intentional. I truly believe that we have to be intentional in what type of work we want our new imagery to do. Yeah. So I'm all open to different ways we can be creative about that. But I do think that so I love this idea of why replace a human with a human. But I'm also open to particular humans, right? I think our system and our thinking about faith, the
structure of our values, the things that are most important to us, so the way that we relate ourselves,
incredibly powerful.
the way we
But
relate
that has to do
ourselves
with my
is simple.
experience of
And
demographics of
so I
the
was,
city,
you know,
the way that
my perception of our
my
country
sense
has shifted
what stories need to
in
be
recent
told.
years.
louder
And I've been
and louder
shocked
and
by
louder
that
and
shift
more often
because I was a
in
pessimist
order for
before.
us to
Like
create
I have been
different
shocked
relationships
by
with our symbols.
you know, I've been taken aback
and
by
this to me is some of the
how
important
much
work
of the
that,
country still holds certain understandings of what
how
this
monuments
nation
tell
is
a
about
story of who we are
and what it ought to, what hills it ought to be willing to die on.
or identity as
That to me has been incredibly shocking.
I'd love to hear what y'all thought about that.
I don't know if that's about my own naivete. I don't know if that's, you know, there's lots of ways that I try to explain that to myself, but with those, you know, I think that for many people,
or our identity as
this is a moment of confirmation.
Has it shifted?
Of what folks
Yeah,
have
so
experienced on a
what's that
regular
shift been
basis.
like? What is that? How,
And
you know, what's, yes.
Those
Yeah,
are the folks that we need to be finding ways to allow to teach us right now.
Yeah.
The folks who are experiencing this moment as continuous of
Unmoored.
Now, I know that that's really hard to conceptualize because in many ways we're living through a world historic moment. So I'm not trying to minimize the fact that we're all wearing masks even as we sit in a pavilion, right? But for many folks, they're experiencing the country right now inside of the sickness as just as sick as it's always been. So the question becomes, what do those folks see that we don't see? Right? And they can help us think about what, if any, statues would need to replace a Cristopher Columbus and why, right? I love this idea that what the hell does Cristopher Columbus have to do with Black Lives Matter? I just think that question is so important because I could understand why it could feel completely unrelated, and I could also understand why it has everything to do with Black Lives Matter, right? But finding ways to listen to the folks for whom this is confirmation of what they have always known about, what they've always presupposed about this country, this city, this where they live. Those are the folks who are our teachers right now, and I think we've got actually like biblical wisdom to say those are the folks we need to be listening to. Right? They know something we don't about who we are that we're slowly discovering, painfully discovering.
I just want to say amen to a lot of that. I think I've been thinking a lot about. I for a long time I've thought about that moment in the first, and I will presuppose this because I got burned on this a little bit lately, but this is not an endorsement of any political party or candidate, but in 2008, in the 2008 Obama campaign, there was a moment when it came out some of what the preacher at Obama's Church Trinity UCC, like the way that he talked about America.
Yeah, Jeremiah Wright.
Jeremiah Wright. And and I've thought a lot about it. I wouldn't listen
Our
to
system
those sermons.
and our, you know,
for those, I mean, I was at
faith,
the church where
the
Obama
structure of our
showed up
values,
sometimes.
things that
So
are most
there was
important
all
to
this
us, the way that
because
we
of that
relate
moment.
ourselves.
Anytime Obama came to
the way we
church,
relate
like the
ourselves
whole
is
press
simple.
corps came to church.
And
And with Trump, they're back to like one sleepy reporter in the
my
back.
perception of our country
when
has
Obama came to
shifted
church, the
in
whole press corps
recent
came to
years.
church.
And
Whenever
I've
we
been
get
shocked
preached
by
to
that
Obama,
shift
it was
because
like,
I was a pessimist
he's
before.
got zinged for preaching before.
Like I have been shocked.
And I just
by,
I thought about this, like there was this
you know,
question
I've
about
been
America.
taken aback by
Because the
how
tagline
much of the
that
country
Jeremiah
still
Wright had in that
holds
sermon
certain
that got played
understandings
over and over was an attack
what
at
this
goddamn
nation is
America.
about. Y'all remember this sermon?
You remember this? Yeah. So
what
that's
hills
going
it ought
on.
it ought to be willing to die on.
And then I've had that in my
to me
background
has
basically
been
a lot of times.
incredibly
I've had a
shocking.
moment around the presidency and around
I don't know if that's about my own naivete. I don't know.
And
if
then
that's, I don't. You know, there's lots of ways that I try to.
the
explain
current
that to
president
myself, but,
gets on TV
with those, you know,
and announces that he's going to
I
defund
think that
all
I think
anti-racism
that
training
for
in the
many
government
people,
because it's anti-American.
this is a moment of
And the reality is like
confirmation of what
Candidate
folks
Obama
experience on a regular basis.
canceled his membership at Trinity
Those are the folks that
and
we need to
basically
be finding
distanced
ways
himself
to,
from the past.
allow to teach us right now.
which
I was
some
very
folks were
experiencing
Yeah.
this moment. as
which to me was
continuing
like
moment.
so
So there was like an implicit
Now,
acknowledgement
I know that that's really
about
hard
like,
to conceptualize.
this
because in
is
many
where
ways,
America
we're living through a
is.
world historic moment.
and
so I'm not
after
trying to
8
minimize
years
the fact that
of the
we're all
Obama
wearing masks,
presidency,
even
and now 4 years of the Trump
Right.
presidency,
But for many
to hear
folks,
like this violent, like,
they're experiencing the country
and that's where
right
America
now,
should be.
inside
what it
of the
means to be
sickness.
American
It's just as
is
sick as it's
to
always
not
been.
question
So the
the
question
system's
becomes,
race,
what do those folks
and
see
to not
that
listen
we
to
don't
people who
see?
have been on the receiving end of
Right.
racism and discrimination.
And they can help us think
Listening
about
is
what,
in
if
itself
any,
unfair.
statues
It's
would
just
need
like-
to replace a Christopher Columbus
That
and why,
was-
right? I love this idea
Yeah.
that what the hell does Christopher Columbus have
And,
to
you
do
know,
with
this
Black
is-
Lives
you know,
Matter? I
Trump
just think that
has
question is
these
so important because
painfully
I can understand why
obvious
it feel
ways
completely
of
unrelated,
showing us that we still
and I
need
can
to
also
be
understand why it has
talking about
everything to do with
because
Black
some
Lives
of the way,
Matter, right?
and this is
but
both
finding ways to
read
listen
and
to the
critique
folks for
of
whom
Barack
this is
Obama.
confirmation of what they have
Some
always
of the
known
way that
about,
Obama
what they've always
related to
presupposed
his
about
ability
this
to,
country, this city,
make certain
this
decisions,
where they
right?
live.
So Trump
Those
is
are the
taking
folks
down
who are
certain
teachers
statues
right
and
now.
putting other ones up.
And I think we have
No
have
more
actually,
anti-racism training.
biblical wisdom.
Instead,
Those are the
America
folks
first.
who need to be listening,
Right? That's
They know
removal
something
and
we don't.
replacement.
About who we
Obama
are,
went
and
about
we're slowly
displacement in
discovering,
ways that
painfully
I just want to say
I guess we
amen.
could say had a
to
lot
that.
more
I think
confidence in
I've been thinking a lot about.
in America's ability
I-
to
for a
find
long
middle
time, I've
grounds,
thought about
create
that
middle
moment
grounds,
in the
create
first,
exchange and dialogue, so on and so forth. And
and
I'm with all
I
of
would
that.
presuppose
At
that
the
it's going to
same
get burned
time,
on this a little bit later,
Because
but this is not an
resistance
endorsement of
and,
any political party or candidate,
transformation
but
is about not just
but
opposing
in
dominant
2008,
narratives,
in the
but telling
2008
stories that can give us life in the place
Obama
of those
campaign,
dominant
there was a
narratives.
moment when
I think that
it came
I
out.
love the question
Some
of
of
what
the
statue
preacher
should
at
go there
Obama's
and why,
Trinity UCC,
right? Because it's not
the
just
way that
about
he talked about
a different
America.
image.
Yeah, Jeremiah
No,
Wright.
it is
Jeremiah
about
Wright.
a different image.
And,
It's about
how
we
and I
as
thought
as
a
we
lot
pray,
about it. I
as we
wouldn't listen
meditate,
to those
we come together, we
sermons.
think
Just for those
how
I was
we
with
want
the church
to
where
rely on
Obama
this
showed up
image
sometimes, and so
to help
all
us
this is because of that moment.
think more
anytime
clearly about what it
Obama
means to
came
be
to church,
faithful,
like,
what
the
it means to
whole
be
press
good, and what it
corps
means
came
to
to
be
church.
just.
And
Right?
with Trump,
What
they're back to
images
like
help us
one
do
sleepy
that?
reporters in the back.
And
of
in
the
that way,
church.
there's
So
got to
when
be some
Obama came to church,
intentionality
the whole
around.
press
There's
corps
got to be
came
some
to church.
storytelling.
Whatever
around it
was getting
because,
preached to
you know,
Obama
at
was
bottom,
like,
all we have
he's
is
got
symbols,
things for preaching
right?
for.
This is theology on
And
tap.
I just had thought
Theology
about this, like
begins
there was this
without a
question
theologian
about
for anything,
American.
with the acknowledgement that all we
Because
have
the
access to as
tagline
humans,
that Jeremiah
is language,
Wright had in that sermon,
non-verbal and
was
non-verbal,
an attack
which are
at
just
goddamn
symbols.
America.
right? The words
Y'all
that I'm
remember this
speaking out of my
sermon?
mouth
This-
right now,
yeah.
right? I
So-
hope
so
that they
that's
land
going
on
on.
you in ways that communicate my intentions.
And then
but ultimately,
I have
the
that in my
symbols that
background basically
learn
a
to
lot
use
of times because of my
through
formative
years and
moment
years
of
of
presidency
repetition.
and around like campaigns and things
Right?
like that.
But they're
And then
symbols, right? Some of what happens
current
with the
president
creation of new
gets
social
on
orders,
TV
we have to create new
And
language.
announces that he's going to
We have to be
defund
comfortable not
all
quite knowing what this means
anti-racism
yet, but
training
hoping
in
that
the
it means
government
this, right?
because
And telling
it's
that story
anti-American.
explicitly. Because
And the reality is like
without that intentionality, I think what we discover is
candidate Obama
theology's got a
canceled his
press.
membership at
Their
Trinity
defaults
and
is
basically
to function
distanced
out of
himself
ways
from the
of being that
past,
are
Yes.
obsessed with power,
which
control,
I was
and
very
manipulation and
disappointed about
predictability.
yeah, which to
And so
me
in
was like
opposition to
so.
that,
So
we
there
have
was
to
like
be
an
open to this
implicit
creativity, right? Why does it have to be a
acknowledgement about
person,
like
right? And we have
this
to be
is
open
where
to this type of
America
creativity
is.
that makes us
And
comfortable
after
being
8 years
disempowered.
of the Obama presidency,
Which
and
brings
now
us back
4
to
years
the
of the
knowledge
Trump
that we should be
presidency,
seeking in this
to
moment.
hear
for
like
people
this
who see this
violent,
moment
like,
as confirmation
and
of
that's
they
where
are
America should be.
right. There are
Like
ways
what it
of
means
knowing
to be
and
American
seeing out there
is
that
to
would
not
minister to
question
us right now, right?
the system's
They're just in the
grace.
last places we would look.
And to not listen to people who have been on the receiving end of racism.
So what about that last
discrimination.
question around
Because listening is in
what
itself
are the
un-American.
genes you hope this
It's just
moment
like-
is remembered for?
Yeah.
That's
Where I sit on
And you know, this is, you know, Trump has these painfully obvious ways of showing us that we still need to be talking about white privilege. Because some of the way, and this is both my read of and critique of Barack Obama as president, some of the way that Obama related to his ability to make certain decisions, right? So Trump is taking down certain statues and putting other ones up. No more anti-racism training. Instead, America first, right? That's removal and replacement. Obama went about displacement in ways that I guess we could just say had a lot more confidence And in America's ability to find middle grounds, to create middle grounds through creative exchange and dialogue, so on and so forth. And I'm with all of that. At the same time, because resistance and transformation is about not just opposing dominant narratives, but telling stories that can give us life in the place of those dominant narratives. I think that
and to begin to think about,
I love the question of what statue should go there and why.
Things are possible
Right?
Power
Because it's not just about a
ability
different image. Though it is about a different image. It's about how we, as we pray, as we meditate, as we come together, as we think, how we want to rely on an image to help us think more clearly about what it means to be faithful, what it means to be good, and what it means to be just. Right? What images help us do that? And in that way, there's got to be some intentionality around, and there's got to be some storytelling around it, because, at bottom, all we have is symbols, right? This is theology on tap. Theology begins without a theologian who's worth anything, with the acknowledgement that all we have access to as humans is language, non-verbal and non-verbal, which are just symbols, right? The words that I'm speaking out of my mouth right now, right? I hope that they land on you in ways that communicate my intention, but ultimately they're just symbols that I've learned to use through years and years of repetition. Right? But they're symbols, right? Some of what happens with the creation of new social orders is we have to create new language. We have to be comfortable not quite knowing what this means yet, but hoping that it means this, right? And telling that story
what
explicitly.
actually is the marker?
Because
what is it that
without that
is
intentionality, I think what we discover
is when of the Fortune 500 companies,
their default,
over 30%
are ways of being
led
that
by
are
women and
obsessed
people
with
of
power, control, and the creation of
And I
predictability.
sat with that a minute, and I went.
And so, in opposition to that, we have to be open to this creativity, right? Why does it have to be a person, right? We have to be open to the type of creativity that makes us comfortable being disempowered.
Basis because of the
Which brings us back to the knowledge that we should be seeking in this moment from people who see this moment as confirmation of what they already knew.
What if I asked?
Right? There are ways of knowing and seeing out there that would minister to us right now, right? They're just in the last places we would look.
And I was like, yeah, no, the answer to that question is like,
so what about that last question
around successful when
what are the
black people stop dying in the hands of police? And so for me, it's, I hope that is something that comes out of it. I'm not optimistic at this moment, but I really hope that we're able to not measure it by Ivy League admission or by CEO, but like we're able to actually look at the metric of who's dying at the hands of police. That we're able to actually keep the focus on what's actually happening. And there's all those other metrics that matter, but George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, there's a really specific question that are getting asked. And if we don't keep asking that question, I think it's easy to get really distracted. And then I'll give you the other more hopeful. So just yesterday, and I don't have a good perspective on time anymore, but
I hope this
early
moment
this week, I think it was
time when we learn
a
about
friend of mine
limits,
posted
literally
the
the
list
sort
of candidates for the Episcopal Church to be the
limits
Bishop
of
of Chicago.
power.
And I don't know that it was
What
the
power
first time, but
lacks
it's
the
the first
ability
time I
to
can
do.
remember
Okay.
where
And
all of
to
the
begin
people
to
that
think
are
about
about to be the Bishop of Chicago.
What types
Are
of
people
things are
called?
possible because power is lacked? Because ability
And
is
that
lacked.
to me was
because
just this, like,
right?
it's not a-
Because
I mean, it's-
having the,
it's like a
the
cheap
answer
world.
to the virus is lacked.
But it
You
is
don't
going to
have the
continue to
vaccine.
shift the Episcopal
What kind of
Church,
power do we discover in
which
moments
desperately
where
needs
I
shifting.
hope that
So
this is
it
the
was
moment where
a
that's
small one, but to see a whole slate,
announced.
all of them well qualified, all of them people that I could imagine being my bishop, and to see a full slate that was just not one person of color on a slate, but the
So
whole
I got
slate.
two. This
Was
question I
that
got
to me was
the
the
right
moment
question.
where I was like, yeah, I hope more slates.
So I have a buddy,
I hope more,
one of my
I
best
hope
friends
that
in college
feels
who is,
Wow.
it is the hegemon, right? Like he ticks every box. He's a white, straight man of privilege, and he's the sweetest, most loving guy you know. And he's been working in diversity stuff for a big bank for a long time now, as a white, straight man. But we got talking a little bit over text, and he sent me a text a couple weeks after George Floyd died, when the stuff was really hot. And he said, you know, I've been talking with some executive friends, and we're thinking about like what actually is the marker? Like what is it that is progress? Is it when, you know, like of the Fortune 500 companies, you know, over 30% are led by women and people of color? And I sat with that a minute and I went, and instead of just engaging with them, I thought about like, okay, based on the conversations I get to have on a day-to-day basis because of the congregation that I work in, because of the city that I live in, I need to not engage you where you are and think about like, what if I ask this question of my friends who live in St. Louis, of my African American friends who grew up on the north side of St. Louis and have fought. And I was like, yeah, no, the answer to that question is like, we'll know that this moment was successful when black people stop dying at the hands of police. And so for me, it's, you know, like I hope that is something that comes out of it. I'm not optimistic at this moment.
I think that in the same way that
I really
statue
hope
that
that we're
my
able
friends
to
and I would run past all the time was so
not measure it by
so
IPC
transcendent, right?
admissions
Like,
or by
that question
CEO,
of
but like we're
what
able
is
to
wrong with
actually
people?
look at the
Like,
metric of
why
who's dying
can't you
at the hands
see
of
this?
police.
Like,
That we're able to actually keep
those of us
focus on,
who
like, what's actually
know
happening
that
in front of us. And there's
God
all those
will
other
not be
metrics that
satisfied
matter, but
until
George Floyd,
until
Ahmaud
justice
Arbery,
is
and Breonna Taylor, like there's a really specific question there in that.
We're gonna
And
have
if we
to
don't keep
figure out
asking that
how
question, I think
to
it's easy to get really distracted. And then I'll
start
give you
to
the other
not ask that
more
question in
hopeful,
such rhetorical ways.
So yesterday, and I don't
You've
have
got to
a
become invested,
perspective on
and this
time
is
anymore,
about development of
but
compassion
early
and all
this
kinds
week,
of
I think
other
it was
things that you
yesterday,
don't want to have
a friend of mine
disagree with
posted
right now.
the list
The
of
capacity to
candidates for the
actually
Episcopal
say,
Church to be
what
the
the
Bishop
hell
of
do you
Chicago.
see?
And I don't know that it was the
How
first
can you
time, but
think
it's
that,
the first time I can
right?
remember
And then
where
to actually
all
allow
of the
that
people that are
perspective
up
to
to be the
walk
Bishop of
over
Chicago are people of color.
as something that is possible for a human being that we disagree
And that to
with.
me was just this like, it's
to
not
hold.
a, I mean, it's not going to change the world.
And that
But it
is
is going to continue
akin
to
to
shift the
the
Episcopal
wisdom that has
Church.
come down to us from
Which
lots of
that's what we need to
generations
shift.
of social justice warriors who have said,
So it was a small
you know,
one, but to see a whole slate,
we're going to have to
all of them
outdo
all
them
qualified,
in our
all
capacity
of them
to
people
suffer.
that I could
That's
imagine
Martin
being
Luther
my
King.
bishop.
right?
And to
Sitting
see a
with
full
someone
slate,
is a guy with
it's not
3
one
houses up for
person
me
of
who
color,
flies
it's
the
like
Trump
the whole
flag
slate.
anytime significant Trump news
Was
comes
that
out. Good or bad, he
the
just
moment
flies
where
it.
it's like, yeah,
Right?
I hope more.
3
slates
houses
like
up the
that.
street.
I hope more, you know, like I hope that's where we're headed.
Trump, I haven't asked him yet why he thinks what he thinks, just because I haven't. But that question, this very incisive question, what are people seeing? If we can start to develop a way to answer that question and to think creatively in relationship to the responses that we get, constructively and creatively, I think we'll be going in the right direction. And this has everything to do with how we interpret symbols, right? Because a lot of people saw that statue, they didn't even see Cristopher Columbus. Or if they did, they didn't see Native Americans who had their land stolen. They didn't see colonialism, right? They saw something else. And that process of learning, they learned that, right? Our capacity to engage that directly and explicitly in a sustained way, that's necessary.
I agree with you, and yes, and like I think there's a piece of it. I think they've often, and this is where, as much as I love the Obama years, it's like there's a desire to like just open it and say like we're going to build community and have unity and hear from each other, but I think that point that you made about, you know, what the Bible calls theology, the people that are left out of the discourse, whose voices are where the prophecy lies, whose voices can tell you, they can diagnose the moment. Like, so much of the work is really about realizing that, you know, your neighbor who flies a Trump flag, listening to him is a different prospect from getting him to listen.
I think that in the same way that
to,
statue that, you know, my friends and I would run past all the time is so imminent, but also
right?
so
Like,
transcendent,
and
right? Like,
and
that
unless
question
we find
of
a way
what
to
is wrong with
build
people?
Like,
that
why
dialogue.
can't you
It's not
see
just
this?
about like, oh,
Like,
right is, right and left have to
those
learn
of
how
us
to get
who
together. Unless we
know
way
that
helps people
God will not
really
be satisfied
understand the
until
structural
justice is clear.
Like it's
And
nothing more than a bunch of high
we're
Pollyanna
gonna have to
bipartisan.
figure out how to.
So I didn't mean kumbaya. I didn't
Yeah.
mean like
to
we
not
understand
ask
and
that
then
question
we get
in
along.
such rhetorical
I
ways.
meant this is attached to a point that I made earlier, right?
You've got to become
you know, I was
invested.
talking-
And this is
I was in
about
another meeting today
development
we
of
were talking about
compassion and all kinds
sort
of
of
other
reminding
things that you
one of
don't
the
wanna
things that
have
it means to
people
be
that you
oppressed
disagree with right now
is that and to stand with you.
the capacity to actually
that
say, what
You
the
know
hell
a lot
do you
more
see?
about the worldview of your oppressors than they know about
How
yours.
can you think that, right? And then to actually
developing the
allow that
capacity to
perspective
answer the
to
question,
wash over
what do they see
as
is
something that
directly
is
connected
possible
to
for
establishing
human
solidarity
beings
with folks
disagree
who can teach us how to
to
see what they
hold.
see because you have to see it in order to
And
make
that
it through days.
is
That makes
akin
sense?
to
I didn't mean like
wisdom that's
kumbaya.
come down to
I
us
meant
from
like
lots of generations
developing the
of social
capacity
justice
for this
warriors.
incredibly demanding and difficult
you know,
and trying, almost
we're gonna have
espionage,
to
right? The spiritual
outdo
and moral
them in our
espionage.
capacity to suffer.
Learning how it
That's
is that
Martin
folks
Luther King
hold and maintain certain perspectives.
right?
When
Sitting with someone,
when-
there's a guy who lives 3 houses
the
up
opposite
from
of
me,
the truth
flies
is
the
so
Trump
clear,
flag
right?
anytime
I think that's
Trump
a
news
spiritual
comes out. Good or
capacity
bad,
that
he
has to be
flies it.
developed.
Right?
And
3
I think
houses
that,
up the street from
a lot of folks, especially folks who are progressive,
Trump,
and
I haven't asked him
with
yet why he
a
thinks
well
what he thinks,
means,
just
right?
as-
Like
I haven't. But that
you
question,
don't
this very
have that
incisive
capacity
question,
because
what
you haven't
are
had to
people
develop it.
seeing? If we can start to develop a way to answer that question and to think creatively in relationship to the responses that we get, constructively and creatively, I think we'll be going in the right direction. And this has everything to do with how we interpret symbols, right? Because a lot of people saw that statue and they didn't even see Christopher Columbus, or if they did, they didn't see Native Americans who had their land stolen.
snowing, or it could
They didn't
be
see colonialism,
70.
right? They saw
if we
something
do it
else.
in-
In that
we'll
process
do it
of learning, they
6-ish,
learned that.
but I'll
right?
see about how
Our capacity to engage that directly and explicitly and in a sustained way, that
But
is,
so we'll either be here
that's a
in
necessary.
December. We'll definitely be online.
I agree
And
with
it
you,
looks
Ian.
like the Bishop of Missouri is
Yes,
going to be
Ian.
back with us, and he and
Like,
I will work on
I
the topic.
think
But
There's a piece of it.
so
I think
if you
that
wanna
they
get
often,
engaged,
this is
we'll
this
see
is
how
where,
Netflix
as much as I love the Obama years, like
Ben Sanders will talk about.
there's a desire to like just open it and say like we're going to build community and have unity and hear from each other, but I think that point that you made about, you know, what the Bible calls the Anawi, the people that are left out of the discourse, whose voices are where the prophecy lies, whose voices can tell you, that can diagnose the moment. Like, so much of the work is really about realizing that, you know, your neighbor who flies a Trump flag, listening to him is a different prospect from getting him to listen to parents of kids in public school north of Delmar. Right? Like, and that unless we find a way to build that dialogue that's not just about like, oh, right and left have to learn how to get together, unless we build a way that helps people really understand the structural pieces, like it's nothing more than a bunch of Pollyanna bipartisan sort of.
Yeah. So I didn't mean kumbaya. I didn't mean like we understand them and then we get along. I meant this is attached to a point that I made earlier, right? You know, I was in another meeting today where we were talking about just sort of reminding this. One of the things that it means to be oppressed is that, and to stand with the oppressed, is that you know a lot more about the worldview of your oppressors than they know about yours. So developing the capacity to answer the question, what do they see, is directly connected to establishing solidarity with folks who can teach us how to see what they see, because you have to see it in order to make it through days. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I didn't mean like kumbaya. I meant like developing the capacity for this incredibly demanding and difficult and trying, almost espionage, right? This spiritual and moral espionage. Learning how it is that folks hold and maintain certain perspectives when the opposite and the truth is so clear, right? I think that's a spiritual capacity that has to be developed.
And I think that a lot of folks, especially folks who are progressive or liberal leaning, but of well means, right? Like, we don't have that capacity because we haven't had to develop it.
Any other questions you want to ask Ben? Thoughts you want to get out before we're done? All right. Next month, we will have Theology on Tap. I'm working on a speaker. If you got an idea of a speaker on a topic, I'd love to hear from you. We're going to just see what weather it's like because it's the part of the year where it could be snowing or it could be 70. But if we do it we'll do it 6-ish, but I'll see about Tower Grove turning these lights on because I know it's got the capacity, but I don't know how to turn it on. But so we'll either be here in December, we'll definitely be online. And it looks like the Bishop of Missouri is going to be back with us, and he and I will work up a topic, but that'll be fun. So if you want to get engaged around what Theology on Tap looks like, shoot me an email. But will you help me thank Ben Sanders for talking about that?